Welcome, everyone. Today's episode, we have a very special guest, Kate Johnson, who is a memoirist. I kept looking at that word and thinking, memoirist,
Yeah.
writer, a poet, and occasional humorist, which I love. As a pastor's daughter and survivor advocate, she writes about religious trauma, shame, silence, grief from estrangement, and a long road of deconstruction after evangelicalism. Through her work, she helps others feel less alone so they can reclaim their voice, self trust, and creative joy. She writes a Substack newsletter called Quips and Confessionals and has been published in One Art, Swim with two M's, the Belladonna, and Eclectica. When she's not writing, you'll find her on long walks in the woods collecting more books than she has time to read and learning trapeze. So we're going to touch that first, but I want to say, you probably don't know this, but one of my little side businesses, as you could call it, is teaching people, therapists, coaches, and this summer teachers how to create their own podcast. And it's kind of my quest. A big thing for me was finding my voice. A lot of my
Yeah.
therapeutic work for myself has been about not just finding my voice. I always had it. It wasn't
Mhm.
lost, but using it and really
Yeah.
feeling comfortable freeing my voice. So working with other people. So we'll get to that. But I wanted to say, I love that this is really your mission and that you have this recognition that the systems that are in place very early on in our lives often are responsible without maybe intentionally, but they are responsible for programming us in a way that make us afraid to use our voice or use our gifts. And this podcast is all about the unprogramming. So I love when I have someone come on who this is their work, right? Is to help other
Yeah.
people unprogram. All that said, I want to hear about trapeze because I think it's a light way to. I also have a daughter who goes to a summer camp every summer and they do circus. So they do, it's a performing arts camp, right? A pretty big one up in New York. And they do what's called circus. She learned, she's too afraid to do trapeze, but they do trapeze at the same time as this big show where they spin fire. So she's not afraid of fire because she's Leo. But I'm always fascinated when we go and just like my palms are sweating as I watch the kids doing trapeze. So
Mhm.
how did that come about? Why did you decide to
Yeah.
do that?
Yeah. The trapeze happened on accident. I was with a partner at the time who wasn't very good for me, and we had an argument, and I was like, I just need to get out of the house. And on a whim, I looked up like circus classes near me. Like I'd probably been seeing like videos of like silks and that sort of thing. That was what I
Yeah.
was originally going for. I was like, I just need to get out of the house and like do something. And
Yep.
it ended up that there was like a class like in 30 minutes. So I went over there and took the class and loved it. And the guy is since long gone. But trapeze and I was doing silks, but trapeze was the one that eventually really spoke to me. And also lyra, which is like a trapeze, but it's a
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I do that one as well. But it's become such a freeing thing for me because I since I was little, I always wanted to fly. And I saw there's a circus video, kids singing and that sort of thing. It was like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But they had a circus one and I really wanted to do the trapeze. I was like, that's so cool. And my cousin, she was like, "Oh, you can't be a trapeze artist. You can't do 10 push-ups." Um, I'm gonna learn how to do 10 push-ups so I could do that. But it's just always been this thing of things that you're told that you can't do and things that I can do now, and it's so freeing to be able to do that.
I
And
love
it's also been teaching me in other ways. Trapeze is something I still love to do. I've actually had to take a break from it recently because I've just been having some health issues. And
that.
it's really taught me how to trust my body and where my body is at now. Because for a while, it was a symbol of, oh, I can push myself, I can do this,
Right.
do all these things. But it's also been teaching me, okay, sometimes you need to take a step back and listen to your
Yeah.
body and where your body's at now. So it's been really healing in both directions.
I love that.
Yeah.
You just said so many things that are so important. And I think,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, trust our body, listen to our body, but also learning something new. I don't think many people realize how impactful learning something new is on our traumatized brains,
Yeah.
right? And putting yourself out there at that moment when you were in this relationship that wasn't super helpful or healthy,
Yeah.
and then doing this, like, I'm sure it helped open up pathways that helped you move on when you needed to.
Yeah. It's like the space trapeze. People ask me, like, oh, do you go to church now? I probably still consider myself a Christian humanist in particular, but I say I don't go to church. I go to trapeze
Oh,
class. And it's this way
awesome.
of reclaiming this space in my life of just this freedom and this. I don't do flying trapeze, the static trapeze, but that feeling of flying is
Yeah.
just so freeing.
Yeah. Ugh,
Yeah. And
I
it's just
love
this
that.
really embrace of my inner child, which is just a great that it that is kind of church to me is coming home to her each week and having that
Yeah.
fun and playfulness in my life.
I
Yeah.
love that. I think that, gosh, the theme of my week seems to be like embracing, filling in the holes and the missing things that
Mm-hmm.
our littles didn't have. Instead of looking at everything like, oh, you're doing that because you're wounded. No, I'm doing that
Yeah.
because I'm caring and I'm giving her something that she didn't have that she needed. And whether that's
Mm-hmm.
something that a partner can offer me or a friendship can offer me or trapeze can offer me,
Yeah.
wonderful. I love that. Love
Yeah.
it. Okay, let's back up a little bit, if that's okay with you.
Mhm.
You grew up a pastor's daughter. We want to
I
talk
did.
about that first because I think it sets the stage for where we're going
Yeah.
in this conversation, and it just helps the audience understand where you've come from and how you've got where you are now. When did you notice a gap between what you were taught and what you were actually experiencing?
I think it came a little later on. So I think it helps to describe a little what being a pastor's daughter was like.
Yeah.
So I was a pastor's daughter in the PCA Church, which is an evangelical denomination. It's the Presbyterian Church of America. It's it's the less cool version of the PCUSA Church, which allow women to preach.
Okay.
And the Presbyterian, or the PCA Church in particular, is a Calvinist denomination. So they believe in total depravity. So it's not like you did a bad thing, it's like you
Mhm.
are bad. And only the grace of God can save you. And like when child development wise, right? Like when you're a child, you really absorb things like, I didn't do a bad thing, I am bad. It's all about the
Big
I.
difference.
It's really about your identity. That's the base.
Yep.
So I think I realized I grew up with all these messages like God is love, Jesus loves you, like that sort of thing. They weren't teaching Calvinism to like preschoolers. But the things at home were very different. I grew up during a time of the family values culture. So there was a lot of rules around which media you are allowed to consume, and everything seemed very dangerous on the outside. Like I remember I almost wasn't allowed to watch Dragon Tales one time, like an episode of Dragon Tales, because they had the farting episode.
Wow.
Yeah. But it was less about the church itself and more on keeping up appearances, right? Because you have so much pressure on you as a pastor's family, where literally, if your kids are obedient or not,
Yeah.
could determine your job position, kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
And you're really judged by whether or not the kids in your home are behaving like little adults and they're kids. And
They are.
I was very lucky my mom understood that. Yeah. I was very lucky that my mom understood that in a lot of ways. I think my dad might have been influenced a little bit more by like the Calvinism because he was a youth
Yeah.
pastor. So it was very much like when I got my first spanking for the first time, it was this idea of you didn't do a bad thing, that feeling of you are bad.
You're
And
bad, and that's why you're being spanked.
yeah,
You're being spanked because you stole something or
yeah.
you you talked back or something. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I remember my first spanking. The reason I got spanked is because my dad left all his CDs everywhere. And there were shiny CDs on a red carpet, and I was playing on them like Don't Touch the Lava. So there was this playfulness about it.
Yeah.
And like, I understand my dad didn't want his CDs broken. CDs are
Right.
expensive, man. But there was just such a playfulness.
Right. An
I
innocence. You
wasn't
had
trying to
no
be
idea.
sinful. I was just like, this
Yeah.
sounds like a fun game. I think going back to your original question, I noticed a gap between the God that was taught and the God that was being taught through these systems of this authoritarian parenting. If God is love, how can he also be this authoritarian figure in the sky who's going to punish you if you do something bad or believes that you are internally bad? And then, in that same respect, how can God truly love you if you are at your core bad? So I think there was always a part of me that believed I can't truly be bad at my core. Like, there's this gap between what I'm being taught. Yeah.
But I think it's important to point out that you recognized that probably later in life, but a lot of people never do.
Yeah.
And that those underlying beliefs can stick with people forever, right? And
Yeah.
dictate
And they're so
and narrate their
destructive.
life. So destructive.
Yeah.
I work with a lot of clients doing EMDR therapy, and we're trying to get to
Hmm.
the core belief that's driving whatever behavior or depression or whatever they're working through.
Yeah.
And so many times it's is call it religious trauma or even cultural
Hmm.
trauma. So many of those beliefs came from something that was taught to them either in church or from their religion and telling them that they are bad. Not
Yeah.
that what you did was bad, but you are bad. We aren't capable as little kids learning the difference between those two things. So adults have to tell us. We have to
Yeah.
tell kids, you're not bad, right?
Yeah.
You're not a bad person because the fundamental belief, even if it's subconscious, I am bad, creates tremendous roadblocks for you
Yeah.
throughout your life. And so it sounds like you were able to put those pieces together at some point
Yeah.
and
Later
understand
in
the
life.
difference. So
Yeah.
thankfully for that.
Yeah. There's
Um,
another piece on it that I do want to touch on that I think is also important for people who have gone through that. So you learn fundamentally the shame at
yep,
a very young age, and that underlies a lot of things.
yep,
But when you're experiencing Christian authoritarian parenting, especially, you learn that your body is under the authority of your parents, authority of your God. Your body is not your own.
yeah,
And you also learn that love equals hurt, and that the people who love you the most in your life are the people who can hurt you.
yeah,
And I think those are two things that we don't talk a much as much about, but it really undergirds a lot of what we're talking about today of that idea that the body is not your own, but really reclaiming the body is your own.
yeah.
Your body is so wise. And by reclaiming your body, also reclaiming your voice.
Yeah. So important. And it's so important for people to understand what they're teaching their kids. I feel like a lot of the people who
Mhm.
listen to this podcast are parents.
Yeah.
And as parents, we're really not taught about attachment, how
Yeah.
important that is. We're not taught about the way we say things to our kids unless we seek it out. So I have an older son who's 28. I have two younger children who are 13 and almost 16. And I really followed a lot of my own father, who was pretty authoritarian's
Hmm.
ways of raising my oldest. I was very
Hmm.
young. I was very worried about what people thought because I was a young single.
Yeah.
I wanted him to be very well behaved. I wanted my kid to outperform and outbehave every other kid to show that I was doing a good job because I was
Hmm.
young. My brain wasn't completely formed when I had him.
Hmm.
So when I had kind of started my therapy journey and my other two little kids, they weren't responding to this.
One, like,
I always said, like, I won the lottery with him because
hmm,
he was
yeah.
easy because I was controlling. Then I get these two and they're like, no, we're not doing that. I've got a Leo and a
Hmm.
Taurus. We are not. And my Pisces self's like, oh. So my therapist recommended this really great book, Conscious Parenting by
Hmm.
Dr. Shafali. And it changed our lives because
Yeah.
the overarching theme of the book is they're not you, and they're not
Yeah.
even a reflection of you. And that's not
Hmm.
what I was taught. I was taught,
Yeah.
like, sit up straight, cleanish your plate, manners are
Hmm.
everything, because I needed to perform and be the best kid to make them look good. Well, that's
Yeah.
a heck of a lot of pressure for a
Hmm.
child. And
Yeah.
so with my 2 younger kids, they have so much more confidence, and they navigate life very differently, and they feel free to try new things, and they're not
Mhm.
afraid to put themselves out there.
Yeah.
Totally different because I started therapy,
Yeah.
and I started practicing mindfulness, and I started recognizing, oh, I can't really tell them what to do. This is their journey. I'm just here to keep
Yeah.
them safe on this journey. Like, they'll find their way and they'll figure it out.
Yeah.
I don't think we realize as parents, I certainly didn't with my older son, like how important it was to give him freedom and to not ever put that pressure on him. His behavior, his performance, how he shows up is a reflection of me.
Yeah.
Uh, and so that's one thing. My younger kids are not afraid to use their voice at all. My daughter was just lead in Oklahoma and incredible.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and night and day. My older son wouldn't even give a public speech. He'd be like,
Mhm.
this is so
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
um, you found writing as a way
Yeah.
to give you an outlet and a way to reach the truth, right?
Yeah.
Tell me more about that, how writing became such a big part of your life.
Yeah. I did want to mention before, though, there is a really good book for those of your listeners who are still Christian or even want to just unpack some of the
Yeah.
things. It's called The Myth of Good Christian Parenting.
Okay.
And it really dissects a lot of the things that we grew up with and then offers alternatives. I believe it's written by a therapist, so
Oh,
it's like
great.
very grounded.
Show notes so
Yeah,
people can
definitely.
read it. That's
Um,
great.
yeah, and then the other thing I want to mention about being a pastor's daughter that I thought was funny that I heard recently is pastors' kids are the original influencers' kids, which
Yeah.
I thought was very funny.
Yeah, it is funny.
Yeah, but it was just like what you were saying is like there's such a pressure to perform right, and that's even more put on the
Yeah.
pastors' kids.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah,
It's funny we don't think about the profession of parents having such a huge impact on kids, but it
yeah.
really is. It's a huge, it's,
Yeah, and I have such compassion for there's accountability, right? But like I have such compassion because as a parent, you're just trying to do the right thing, and when
yeah, you
you're
don't know.
in evangelicalism, the stakes are so high, right? Like, and when it's your job, the stakes are so high. So I have that's where I've been able to find compassion in my heart is they like people try to do the best that they can,
Yeah.
and it's not always the best thing.
Not. I look at
Yeah,
my older son and I talk a lot about how different the other two have been brought up.
yeah,
And of course, I've apologized. And he's, Mom, you
yeah.
were doing the best. That's all you knew.
Yeah, and
I
that
didn't
apology is
know.
so important.
Yeah.
So
But
many
yeah.
people don't get that.
Yeah.
Accountability is so
Yeah.
great and so
Yeah, I was like,
healing.
"We were growing up together, bud. I did lean on you. I parentified you. I did all of those things."
Yeah.
Uh, and he's really good about, "Oh, no, you were doing the best you could,
Yeah.
Mom." Yeah.
Gift to him.
I think the more
Yeah.
we can educate people when your kids are little, my little kids
Mhm.
we had already gotten to 4 and 5-ish for my daughter, I think, when I started having this realization like, "Oh, so you can change." That's the point. Like, if you
Yeah.
realize if someone's listening and they're like, "Ugh, I'm kind of doing this or I'm doing that or I didn't
Yeah.
realize how big of an impact that would have." We can absolutely change what we're
Yeah.
doing. And I feel like as a parent, I'm constantly changing. My
Mhm.
kids are both in therapy and I'm like, "Hey, we are in a new thing now. How do I navigate this?" I'm a therapist and I'm
Yeah.
asking. Like 13 for my daughter was a really rough time. And I had to phone in her therapist and be like, "I don't know how to talk to her right now." She's
Yeah.
like, ask questions. Do not lecture her." And I was like,
Yeah,
"Okay."
and I think that's so important because I think there's such a fear as parents of, "Oh, what if my kid doesn't wanna have a relationship with me?
Yeah.
What if all this kind of stuff?" But I think when I know a lot of people who grew up in evangelicalism who have deconstructed, there's a lot of estrangement, and part of the problem, I think, is that the parents can't admit when they're wrong. And
Yeah. Admit when you
yeah,
did something
it
wrong.
yeah, for sure, and I think there's an added layer of it
Mhm.
because it goes back to that if you didn't do something bad, you are bad, right? To
Yeah.
admit that you did something wrong is to admit that you are at your core bad. There's
Or a
so
bad
much. Yeah, or a bad parent, like you are
yeah.
bad. So it's like you have that cognitive dissonance. I can't admit that I did this bad thing. But I think one of the most healing things to see, and the parent I'm still in contact with, to see their growth of being able to admit when they are wrong and to be able to work on those things, because just realizing I can improve, I can do better, I can grow, I can learn, and I don't have to feel threatened by this thing, because at the end of the day, my child's just looking for connection.
Yeah. Yeah, I see this come up a lot with my parents who are in the middle of a divorce
Yeah.
and they don't want to send their kid to therapy. And it's always my first recommendation. Get them in with a therapist, even if they only see them once a month.
Mm-hmm.
They need to be able to talk about this with someone other than you.
Yeah.
And I went through it with my daughter. She was my first kid to go into therapy. And she was at that 11, 12. It was scary. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
but she's going to talk to this other person about me. What are they going
Mm-hmm.
to think of? But at the end of the day, I knew she
Yeah.
needs them and she's going to need them more and more until she goes away to college and probably even after. So I always tell people, I know how scary this is to,
Yeah.
but what I have found is those therapists are an incredible tool because there are hard times, especially in the teenage years.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're navigating something really challenging like divorce, we've navigated multiple things where I've had to say, this is what I'm thinking. Is this the way you would approach it? You don't have to tell me what she's saying to you, but based on what you know, is this the best way for us to navigate this situation? And that's
Yeah.
incredibly helpful. It's like having an insider, right? They don't
Yeah.
tell you what's happening, but they can tell you, I wouldn't do it that way, or try this approach and see how this works. My daughter saying what you're feeling and what you say matters is literally like magic to her. Because somewhere along the line, she thought what she says doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Um, Probably because she has a little brother who's really uptight. And so I would always listen to both sides of the story and then do the typical parent
Mm-hmm.
thing where they both get in trouble for something one did. And so she, for a while, was like, it doesn't matter what I say. And I
Yeah.
was like, oh, no, your voice really matters. So that said, that's the
Yeah.
perfect
Back to the
way.
rating.
Back, I wanted to really get into this idea of finding your voice after silence.
Yeah.
Because I think that this is something that we share in common. And it's also something that many people who are probably listening have experienced or are experiencing. You
Yeah.
describe voice as something that can be buried, conditioned,
Mm-hmm.
shamed, or silenced, and ultimately your savior. What did the journey from being buried to
Mm-hmm.
spoken look like for you?
So it's a long journey. So, like I was saying before, I grew up being a pastor's daughter. I think the first time when I discovered a safe place to express my voice that was praised was through writing. So I don't know if anyone remembers, but there was the Young Writers and Illustrators contest, like the Reading Rainbow one.
Yeah.
It was a chance to write and illustrate a story. I remember, I don't even think I could write the first time that I heard about it, but when I could write, I wrote this story with my dad, and I just remember being praised for that imagination and that sort of thing. And it really became a place where I could express my thoughts and those innermost thoughts, right? Because they were private. My grandma was really great about giving me journals. I have some very funny journal entry
Yeah.
of just things that I expressed or frustrations when I felt like my voice wasn't being heard in the house and that sort of thing. Like that was a place to express my voice. Another place to express my voice is art. I loved art growing up. Art is such a great tool to express your emotions
Oh, yeah.
and express your feelings. It was felt so validated to have those things valued, even when I didn't always feel like I could speak up for
Yeah.
things myself. And as I had a lot of those things in childhood, but when I got to the point, it was in 2005, my dad was arrested. At he was a youth pastor and he was arrested for the things that youth pastors are arrested for. It was child sexual abuse material. At the time it was called child pornography. Which is not not what it is. It is
Yeah.
abuse stuff, but he had been chatting with kids online. There was photos involved and all that sort of stuff, and it was just a really terrible situation.
How
And
old were how old were you
I
when that?
I was 9 years old at the time. So I found myself in a very strange situation where my safety lay in my silence. And what I mean by that is some people stood around, but it was very much, I remember going through the Child Protective Services stuff and the social worker coming to the house and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And them asking things like, oh, are you spanked? Have you been spanked? Where are you spanked? Are you spanked with your clothes on, with your clothes off? That sort of thing. And we also had a therapist that we were supposed to go to. And I remember my dad literally saying, I think it was before the therapist, don't tell them anything that could have you taken away from us. And the thing that was not being said there that I understood was if I say anything, I could lose my siblings. We could be separated. I
Right.
could lose my parents. I could lose all the safety and stability in my life. And it was I also learned that if I had told people what was going on at home, that my dad was on the sex offender registry. At the time, I didn't know his crime. I just knew that it had to do with computers. But if I talked about it, then I could lose all my friends again. Message communicated. Um, the other thing in that situation was there was things like food insecurity going on where we couldn't fill the fridge up like we used to, and my dad didn't have a job of his offense and what was going on. My parents were going through their savings. So not having the money for the things that we used to, later on having a lot of housing and financial instability because we were in the middle of a recession. And my dad was a landscaper, and the landscaping business in particular was very volatile.
Yeah.
So going back, we had the initial arrest. There was a lot of court proceedings and that sort of thing. My dad lived apart from us for, I believe it was a little over a year for a variety of reasons. He moved back into us. It was determined that it was safe enough for him to live with us. But as a result of that, our household was put on the sex offender registry.
Yeah.
So that meant that our address is public to strangers online. So my dad had received death threats, people who knew that he was there, maybe didn't know that he had kids at home. We were always hyper vigilant
Yeah.
for people who might threaten us. And it becomes really easy in that situation for an abusive person to take that situation and say, the whole world is against you, but I'm your safety. And by the structure of the sex offender registry, there's so much shame where you internalize, my dad didn't do a bad thing, I am the bad person. We are the bad family, and people don't want to
Right.
hang out with us. We are the bad family. Because that's just child psychology, right?
Yeah.
Like, we are the bad family, and I have to protect myself because these people are against us. Like, they're
Right.
sending things to our house, that sort of thing.
The
And
registry creating it's supposed to be a warning system for people,
yeah,
but in reality, in your reality at that time, and probably it continues, it's doing nothing to protect the women and children who live
yeah.
in the home.
So after the initial social workers, the child therapist, no one came
Well,
in 15 years.
I think that as a person who is from the outside looking in, I
Yeah.
think most of us think of someone on the sex offender registry and we
Mm-hmm.
automatically think of some single man
Yeah.
living in a tiny apartment or living in a house by himself. That is not at all what
Yeah.
has happened and what the reality is. And people can be put on the registry for lots of reasons.
Yeah.
And I don't think ever prior to reading about you, I ever have considered, and I'm a therapist and a
Mm-hmm.
former attorney with a heck of a lot of experience. I don't think I've ever thought of someone being on the sex offender registry and having a wife and children living in their home with them.
Yeah.
And I would say I am probably the majority.
Yeah.
And
We're
so,
say that we're the children forgot because we say the sex offender registry is here to protect children,
yeah,
but we're
but not the children
we're
that
the
live.
children that shame forgot.
Right. The thing about the registry that really I've never understood is there is really no differentiation really
Yeah.
between certain types of offenders and others, right?
Mhm.
Like yeah, it's a very difficult policy to wrap your head around, to be honest, and how it
Yeah. There's a few misconceptions about the sex offender registry, and I'll preface this by saying that all my work that I do around this is to protect survivors, women and children, because I think in order to protect those groups of people, we have to consider critiquing the systems that
Yeah,
claim to protect those
yep,
groups. I think there are things that we haven't questioned before as someone who has lived on the sex offender registry and someone who is a survivor myself, that we need to be asking in order to better protect the people that we want to protect, right? Those vulnerable groups of people. I think, like you said, we imagine it as this, I don't know, this strange, shadowy monster man who's just on his computer. I think there was like a more you know commercial of this shadowy, weird, middle aged guy, like
yeah, he's, like, in
on
a
his computer.
computer, like
Yeah, but
yeah,
statistically, and this blew my mind, this is misrepresented so many places, is statistically like the average sexual offender is married, religious, white, with children. And that's statistics, and that's a sad reality. It's also another big misconception is this idea of stranger danger. Stranger danger is a myth. Like for adults, it's over 80% of people know their offender. For children, it's 97%.
yeah,
Uh
every
yeah.
client, every friend, every person I know who has some history of sexual abuse, they absolutely knew and trusted.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's something that you point out about the registry working against the women and children in the home is this
Mhm.
idea of how isolating it is
Yeah.
in a situation where there is a higher likelihood that this person could be abusive, right, towards
Yeah.
their wife and children.
And by the very structure of the sex offender registry, it makes it even more possible that they'll be abusive because there has been research that when you have housing instability, financial instability, shame, there is a higher likely those all create conditions for abuse. And there's also been another study that shows that the shame that the sex offender registry creates, where there's no chance of getting out of it, right?
Yeah.
For years and years, that actually can push people to recidivize again. And that's another misconception is recidivism is relatively low. It's in the 3-4% range by some estimates. But when you get to the 15-year mark, it gets pushed up significantly because of that shame that the registry creates, and I think we need to look at that's exactly what happened in my dad's situation, is we were on the registry for years, and literally at the 15-year mark, he recidivized, and unfortunately, it had to do with a member of my family, and no children were protected. And thankfully, he's in prison now, but even now in prison, he has mental health issues. There's no getting around it. I'm so glad that there is justice being done in this situation, and thankfully, there was nothing physical going on. It was all, like, verbal stuff and text messages and that sort of thing, but I'm so thankful that justice is being done in that situation. I wish that he had access to some significant mental health treatment so that we can protect more kids in the future. Because just sitting there with other people basically is not going to do anything to protect kids.
No.
And we're just delaying even more harm. And I like it's a structural thing, right? So if we're creating these conditions, if we're not addressing the root issue, like we're going to have even more kids
Yeah.
and people.
Yeah.
Um, and I hope to God that doesn't happen, but we need to be willing to look at those structures that create those conditions so that we can protect people.
Absolutely. I also want to talk about, as much as you're willing to, the amount of shame women feel
Yeah.
or staying in, and it doesn't even have to be this specific situation if there's a sex offender involved, but just staying in an unhealthy or abusive situation. I see so many women, they stay because
Mhm.
of shame.
Yeah.
We stay for many, many, many reasons. But I think that as friends, as other women, like if we understood that just showing up and saying, I'm here for you instead of giving our opinion and shaming people for staying in these
Mm-hmm.
situations, people will find their way out, but they won't find their way out if you isolate them and they stop
Yeah.
talking. So many people come to me and they're like, I can't talk to my sister. I'm close with my sister, but I can't talk to her about it anymore because she just says, why aren't you leaving? So I don't know how much of that you've been exposed to. I know in your situation, you experienced or you witnessed that. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I actually have experienced it in my own story. When you grow up in patterns, you look for those patterns in adulthood
Yep.
consciously, and I was in a domestic abusive relationship. And it never got physical, but it very much replicated the emotional, maybe not the financial. That yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna cut and start over. Do you mind if friend who's also a domestic abuse survivor, she wrote a very beautiful poem about why didn't she just leave? Do you mind if I read
Yeah.
that?
Oh, I would
Uh
love that.
yeah, her new book just came out. One second. Okay.
Just
Um,
cut right here and we'll cut that back so it
yeah.
goes.
Yeah, so I think so often we ask why women didn't just leave, right? But when we ask why didn't you just leave? There's so much to it, right? There's an emotional part. You think that maybe they can change. For a lot of women, it's a financial piece. But I want to read this poem for my friend Sarah Hansen. She just had a new book come out called Conjuring the Hurricane. And she's a domestic abuse survivor herself. And she wrote this beautiful poem, her why she didn't just leave. I asked once, how do bees fly with such tiny wings? It doesn't look like it should be possible, but that's only if you think wings like birds. Bees move their wings diagonally, starting up and back, then forward and down, while also flipping their wings upside down as they flap, all of which causes the air above the wings to swirl, and it is this swirling vortex that creates the lift for flight. Physicists call this dynamic stall. It doesn't look like it should be possible. Each countercurrent is an exit. The stall is your answer. She is working out how to leave, the only way that is possible to her. She is conjuring the hurricane.
I love that. It's
Yeah.
beautiful.
I think there's so much working out that takes time, and it's so hard because, right, there's grief in leaving any relationship, and when you can't find your safety, your grounding,
Yep.
and that sort of situation, it is really hard to go through the grief in order to get out. Sometimes our base survival instincts get us out of that situation. The grief comes later,
Yep.
but it's really finding that way out any way that you can. In my situation, it was years of denial that
Right.
this was really happening and just trying to find my way out through that. For other women, especially women who have children, there's all sorts of financial things. And I will speak to a little of the broader research on women who have partners on the sex offender registry is there's so much shame of you failed as a mother somehow. I think of the Kendra Duggars and the Anna Duggars, right?
Yeah.
And she needs to just leave the situation. But I bet to her, just having compassion for her and her situation and knowing what that's going through, she probably feels like the whole world is against her.
Yep.
Is it even safe to step out into that world in this thing that she's grown up in? And the people who are offering her safety or that semblance of safety are the people within the family structure.
Right.
And what kind of resources are available? We've had so many cuts to SNAP, to think to programs that help domestic abuse survivors, victims of human trafficking just in this past year, in order to get stable housing, stable food, stable whatever that you need to provide that sense of safety for your kids. We don't have universal childcare. Thinking of all those things, and I I always speak from the story from my own experience, but I also have so much compassion for people who are in my mom's situation who were on the sex offender registry with a partner because you can't leave the kids at home. You don't have a partner who can take care of them because they are on the sex offender registry. For a long time, we weren't even allowed in the same room alone with that person. And you can't work because you can't leave your kids at home. Yeah.
I think a lot of people don't take into consideration unless they're
Yeah.
in the situation. And then, of course, they do, is that we also live in a country where most parents are given access to 50% custody regardless of what they've done. It
Yeah.
may be different if they are on the sex offender list, but they can do a lot of things. They can
Yeah.
be addicts. They can have a history of criminal activity. They can be suspected of things, and they can still get access if you leave them to your
Mm-hmm.
child 50% of the time or less. If you know you're married to an abuser, the last thing you want to do, I watch women go through this all the time. Most of my
Yeah.
clients are considering, in the middle of, or just post divorce. The majority of them are, both in my therapy and my coaching practice. And what the family courts do is atrocious to these
Yeah.
women. The system works against women who are married to abusive spouses. We've given this permission for people to take their children 50% of the time when half the time they don't intend to do that. And additionally, the abuse just comes out onto the kids so many times.
Mm-hmm.
I work with a lot of women who are staying to protect their kids. They
Yeah.
know they're going to leave when they're 18. So our work is, how do we survive this?
Yeah.
How do we continue to protect the kids in this environment? And how do we prepare for when they are all 18 and they no longer have to choose? Because I don't
Yeah.
know where you are, but in the state of Florida, you never have a right to say, I don't want to go until you're
Yeah.
18. It's 18
Mm.
is the age of consent and the age of saying, I don't want to go with that parent. Now, a rational person, if the child is saying, I don't want to go with you, would say, okay, can we get
Yeah.
dinner? Or we make a compromise. But an abusive person is going to say, no, you're coming with me.
Yeah.
And the court says, no, you have to go.
Your silence is your safety.
Yes. So your silence
Yeah.
becomes your safety, and staying becomes your children's safety. I see it every day. And I see people in the system getting their children taken from them, the safe parent. And it's so traumatic. Another level
Yeah.
of trauma and then get your kids back and have them, they're falling apart. And these
Yeah.
same abusive partners, whether it be a man or a woman, won't let you get therapy for your kids. It is horrible. So the point here is it's not as easy as it sounds.
There's so much nuance.
So many roadblocks.
Yeah. And I always say the men, because it is majority men, there are women, but in so many of the situations, the men might do the thing, but it's the women who often pay the price. And it is so often at the expense of their own voice because they're trying to protect themselves and they are trying to protect the people around them. So going back to my voice, I learned that my silence was my safety, and my silence was how I protected my siblings who became like my kids. There was a lot of parentification in my home too, where I was taking on a whole bunch of the chores where my dad, when he was allowed alone with us, we were both working for his business in middle school, shoveling mulch. And at the same time, when he had me alone, he'd say, "Oh, I don't have money for rent or groceries or Christmas presents for your siblings. Can you let me borrow this money?" So there was that aspect of financial abuse as
Mhm.
well.
Yeah.
So, but I couldn't tell anyone because the first thing, of course, he says is, "Don't tell your mom." And throughout that whole situation, as my mom is carrying the whole world on her shoulders, right?
Yeah.
Like, she's carrying so much. He seems like the safe parent,
Yeah.
and presenting himself as the safe parent. So he said, "Don't tell your mom." So I didn't tell her because it would disrupt the system.
Yeah.
And I learned that silence, and it went on for years and years. And I learned that silence and not speaking up for myself and in my own abusive relationship talked about.
Yep.
I learned that silence when there was this whole aspect of purity culture in the evangelical church, and my first kiss was not consensual. And going with that person, I learned not to speak up. I learned not to speak up when they touched me in ways that I didn't want because I was afraid of what might happen to them if I did speak up. So, and literally, as I was going through this, because you're taught so many messages about submission, your body is not your own, sex is not something you do, it's something done to you. My voice literally got, and coming into myself and coming into my identity has really been about making sure that my voice gets bigger and louder and that we're talking about these things. I think the first time that I realized it is when I got to college and that I was bisexual, which was not something allowed in the evangelical church that I grew up in. But it was something that I began to realize. Oh, these are systems that I can no longer be a part of. It's just too unjust.
Yeah.
There's a few things. So this is from 2014 to 2018. There's a few things that happened. I met my best friend who is a Black man. The way that he introduced himself to me was, "You look like the person who would have a lot of goats." So we had this long running joke about baby goats and that sort of thing. He's just a lovely person. But at the same time, Black Lives Matter was going on. And I realized, like, I, of course, was hearing a lot of all lives matter things at home. Fox News was always on in the background. And I realized this literally isn't about, like, all lives matter. This is whether or not my friend is driving around campus and if he's killed or not. What my best friend saved my life. I'm not going to stay silent while these things are going on. Same with my best friend growing up, turned him out as a trans man. There's a really beautiful story of, like, when the first time I understood God. I understood God through shame, through rules, through all these things in my life. But the God that I experienced at church camp, of all places, wasn't in a church. It wasn't anywhere. It was swimming through the lake with my best friend who came out as trans later on and experiencing the joy and peace that came with chasing the fish in the water. And just experiencing what I took to be God's laugh and that playfulness and joy. And that joy and peace has followed me throughout my life. And that's where I've always found God, or what I would say to be God. So later on in life, the HB2 stuff was going on in North Carolina, which is where I'm from, with the bathroom bill. And it became, this isn't some issue out there, right?
Right. This is personal.
This is my best friend growing up and whether or not they can use the bathroom. And that's when I started butting up against the things that I had been taught because I recognized the injustice of it. And the most ironic thing was, like, the whole thing with the HB2 was like, oh, what if they have these pedophiles who are going into the bathrooms and there's literally a pedophile inside the house. But you're worried about the ones going in the bathrooms. But there was just such a difference in what I've been taught and such a revelation of the things that I had grown up with, but also taking the values that I had grown up with and applying them to my life and living them out and the way that I had been taught and keeping to those virtues that I had grown up with and really applying them to my life. And I really, through that, discovered a new version of God that wasn't this God of shame. It was this God of both justice and compassion and mercy and balancing both of those things in my life and finding that joy and peace in my life through that. And there's been a lot of struggles with, as faith has developed and I deconstructed, but that's the conclusion that I've come to, is that there's this joy and peace and it's a treasure worth protecting in our lives. And that's where I found my voice. Is I got out of college. My dad unfortunately recidivized again. And suddenly I found myself being the only breadwinner in this home because I was living with my parents at the time. They didn't have a whole lot of savings. I found myself paying for their rent, but at the same time I made too much for my family of 5 people to qualify for food assistance. So we literally relied on, like, the church meal train in order to, like, survive for the few months. And then later I moved out and really began that process of grief and really processing things. And it was a real struggle because I think, and this goes a little back to what we were talking about before with the women, but there's such a push for spiritual bypassing of these very unjust situations because it's a balance of mercy and justice, right? So we often focus too much at the mercy at the expense of the spiritual bypassing and the lack of accountability and focus less on the justice. What I found through that process is the God that I believe in hates abuse. And that's not something that's taught, but we so often force. My dad was asking for forgiveness and reconciliation days after
Right.
what happened. And it wasn't even enough time to process and grieve and all this sort of stuff. But I knew that if I gave that forgiveness at that point, then it would just be all pushed under the rug and everything would be okay and we'd never be able to question it again. So I withheld that a long time because I needed time to process and to see if they actually came. I think there's so much, the word repentance, I think there's so much baggage with it, but really what the word repent means is to see something clearly so that you
Yeah.
can turn away from it. And I didn't see that. There just wasn't enough time for my dad to come to
Right.
that conclusion.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I took a long time. I did eventually end up talking to him again, and that is a long grief process.
Yeah.
I was in contact with him for a few years, and I think a big part of it was just coming to terms with that grief, right? Because estrangement feels like cutting off an arm on purpose
Yep.
and making this choice to never talk to someone again when they are in the world. It's like, it feels like killing your parent in a way, but on
Well,
purpose, even if they're the one who did the thing, that's why you're having boundaries. So it took me a long time to realize just having contact with this person is not good for me or my body. I started having a lot of mysterious health issues. And it was this culmination of all the things I had gone through, living 15 years on the sex offender registry, purity culture, domestic abuse, like all of these different things culminating in multiple health issues that just no one seemed to have an answer for, except that it was probably related to trauma.
yeah.
I realized that my dad was replicating some of the emotional abuse from earlier in my childhood. And I was like, you haven't turned away from what you've been doing, and the most loving thing I can do to protect the joy and peace that I have found in my life that's sacred is to set this boundary and I didn't go immediately no contact, but I was just like, I need time to
Yeah.
process this, because the most loving thing that I could do in that situation is set those boundaries with him with the hope that one day maybe he could find a better path, but he wasn't going to be able to do that with me there. He was just going to fall into those same patterns. And that was such a hard thing to do,
Mhm.
but it was the best thing for me. And I went through this process of so much grief. But the thing that brought me there is, I think when we talk about purity culture and evangelicalism, there is a kind of a separation of the self and the body that we get into. The body cannot be trusted. The heart is deceitful.
Right.
The body cannot be trusted. It's this real separation from yourself and your body.
Yeah.
But I think what I learned through that, and it was throughout all that, is how ungrounded I had been going on through life.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot going on about being talked about, this idea of like grounding. And I think what most of us don't realize is a lot of us go through life like ungrounded. So either over exercising, overeating, overworking, over all the overs,
Right.
sometimes
Yeah.
unders.
We're all
Yeah.
walking around in fight or flight. Some of us have never been,
Yeah,
some of
exactly.
us have never known life out of survival. And when
Yeah.
you're in survival mode, it's near impossible to be in your body.
Yeah,
So
exactly. And
I
I
remember the first time my
yeah.
therapist in a EMDR session said, "Where do you feel it in your body?" And I was simultaneously doing mindfulness-based stress reduction because this was in the midst of my divorce. And they kept talking about being embodied. And I was like, I don't even know what that means. And she said it in the first time in an EMDR, and I was like, I don't feel anything in my body. She's like, well, scan. I was like, oh, my jaw is kind of tight. And then 10
Mhm.
EMDR sessions later, and 2 months into MBSR, she said, where do you feel it in your body? And I was like, my chest. And I just thought, oh, it was
Mhm.
such an awakening. I was like, oh my God, that's been there this whole time. That happens every time. And now it's like a warning system. If something happens and I feel chest pain, it's the first thing that
Yeah.
happened before PTSD fully kicks in.
Yeah.
Gives me a warning. It's like an alarm. Hey, you feel it. It's coming. your frontal lobe is going to shut down here in a minute if you don't intervene. So that gives me a chance to hand on my chest, remove myself from the situation if possible, start to breathe, and get
Mm-hmm.
control of my nervous system before. Most people, including me pre work, do not know. They don't even feel their chest, even though it happens.
Yeah.
They don't even feel it because they're always in that. And I lived most of my life in survival mode, so I couldn't
Mm-hmm.
feel the difference. And so, this grounding that people are talking about, and there are tons of grounding devices, and you put your feet in the ground. It takes a little more than just saying, I'm going to go grounding.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's
Most people, including myself, do not really know what it means to be embodied, but people are figuring it out, which I love, and we're talking
yeah.
about it. And that's, I think that the important thing that I want to make sure we hit on before we have to sign off today is
Mm-hmm.
really talking about how you're sharing your work now, how therapeutic that's
Yeah.
been from you, and where you're sharing it because you've discovered all of these things. We are using our voice or our writing in a way to help other people discover that. So I want to hear how therapeutic that has been for you, but I also want to make sure we talk about the ways in which you are reaching other people with your story to help them.
Yeah. So I think it took a lot of grief, right? And becoming embodied again. Because, like you said, I lived most of my life in survival mode. During that time, I discovered how silenced my voice had been by everything that I had gone through. And it really started this process of reconnecting to my creativity in a lot of ways. And creativity is so good for us, it's so good for our voice, it's so good for expressing emotions. Yeah, it's so good for so many things. So as I was processing this grief, I started doing the artist way. And I did a more simplified version of the artist way where I wrote 3 morning pages a day and took myself in an artist state. But by doing that journaling and getting through all of that crap that had built up and all of the grief and everything that I've been carrying and writing that out, it really helped me reconnect both to my voice and get out so many of the emotions that I've been. So during that time, I actually became a Reiki practitioner. One of the interesting things of the idea of Reiki really helped me realize where things were in my body and kind of locate what might be going on. So the sacral chakra, which is like right below the belly button, it has to do with emotions, creativity, inner child stuff, and also sexuality. So as you're unraveling, like when you're doing creative stuff, you're literally touching things that are like inner child and emotion
Yes.
stuff. And that connecting those things together, like, okay, as I'm working on these things, I'm also helping these other parts of myself
Right.
and really locating, okay, like, what is my body telling me now? If my throat is tight, does that mean that something's going on with my voice? So
Yeah.
that was very helpful for me to reconnect with my body and literally be asking my body, like, okay, where is this in my body? What can I work on releasing? And what am I letting into my life?
Yeah.
Through that. So I went through a lot of the artist way stuff. I started reconnecting to the creativity. And it was really through that process of grief that I was able to find my voice again. I started doing a lot of writing, a lot of creating, started submitting different places. And around the springtime, I came to the conclusion that I needed to break off the relationship with my dad. And that was kind of, I don't think grief has an end, but that was definitely a point in the grief where there I like to talk about ambiguous grief because I think people in estrangement, like, it's so weird. Like, there's no funeral for for this big, but I created a little ritual where I like wrote an I am poem. And I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it was like I am like I'm the little kid who loved to play in the woods. I'm the kid who loved like American Girl dolls. I'm the kid who used her voice to speak out against injustice. I am all of these things. And it was really a reclaiming of my identity because for
Wow.
so much of my life, I had been a caregiver, I had been a golden child, I had been a scapegoat, I had been the parentified daughter, I had been all these different roles in my life. But who is Kate? And I wrote this poem of all the things that I was in my life. And I ended up sending it to my dad. And it was like, this is the whole person that I love. And I'm like, this is the person who I'm protecting. And I'm protecting this joy and peace that I found in myself and my identity. And I was only able to get to that person through doing the work of grief and the creativity and refining the identity again so I could define myself and be
Yeah.
embodied in that self and identity. And that's what I really want to share with women, because I think there are so many things with abuse that separate us from our identity. So many things in religion that separate us from our identity, where we learn the self is bad. Or if you're in a abusive relationship, like you start to question yourself so
Right.
much. But embodying that identity is really what allows us to break free and use our voice. And it releases us from that. But we can only get there by going through the work and going through the grief and really diving into that. That's why I want to uplift the voices of other women. So their voices are so powerful.
Mm.
Like, one of the revelations that I found is it wasn't just the grief that I was going through, but also the anger, embracing that anger. And I had like this picture pop into my head when I was doing a meditation one day, and it was of this tiger. And it was this idea of this white tiger. She was growling. And what I realized during that is she was teaching me how to use my roar, because what I had been taught, she was protecting me. And that anger was protecting me, and it was protecting little me. And that anger was so important to express and embrace as something that was there. And I think of that, I can only say thank you for this anger, because the anger was not something that was supposed to be expressed. It was something that was shrunk down in the abusive situations. It was part of shrinking my voice. But the finding that anger is what helped me get out. So I think of that and say thank you, because that's what helped me get out. And I think so many women, we have so much shame around our anger, but the
Yes.
anger is just a signal. It's a message to us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I don't know if you know anything about human design. Do you know anything
Mm.
about human design?
Yeah,
I
tell me.
I am a manifester in human design, and
Okay.
anger is not felt. Meaning, when we have a lot of anger, it means we're not living in alignment. And
Mhm.
so, for a manifester, peace, if you feel peace, then you are. And
Yeah.
so, it's funny because I was not really allowed to have conflict or anger growing,
Yeah.
like it was bad. And my
Yeah.
sister she had a very fiery temper. She would turn red and she would yell, and I would watch her get in trouble. And I was like, nope, not doing that. So I have this very interesting relationship with anger now, where I allow myself to feel anger. As
Mhm.
I have had to accept that anger is normal and it's
Yeah.
okay, and that it's okay to express it the way that it feels comfortable, but also as my human design, that when I'm feeling a lot of anger, I may have stepped out of alignment, and I've put
Yeah.
myself into situations where emotion is coming up a lot more than normal. Or if I'm in a state of anger, that's definitely out of alignment. So I think you're right. I think that when we're in a situation that is abusive in any way,
Mhm.
we as women have also, in addition to all of my family conditioning, culturally, we are looked at as
Yeah.
a bitch. We're not supposed to complain. We're not supposed to be angry or anything, right? We can't show up
Mhm.
in the world without being labeled something bad. But we need to accept that anger is a sign that we are a signal to us that we need to
Mhm.
listen to,
Yeah.
that it's a feel that. It's okay to feel
Yeah.
angry. It's okay to feel disappointed. It's okay. And if we choose to not accept that emotion and push it down, it is going to make us sick. It's going to come out in our
Yeah.
body. And yeah, it's so much a signal of something's not right, whether it's
Mhm.
your job or your relationship or a friendship. But you're right. We've been trained to not listen to it, to push it down, to act like it's not there and bypass it.
Yeah.
Um, I want to talk about, we're going to have
Yeah.
to
Oh,
sign
cut for
off
a
here in a
second.
minute.
Sorry. I need to let my dog out. He's whining
Can
back.
hear him.
Sorry. I didn't want to
No
catch on the
worries.
audio.
No, that's okay. We'll cut back. I just want to make sure that we talk about Quips Confessionals, and you tell us a little bit
Yeah, for sure.
about it and how you are currently using humor and how people can find you, because we could probably talk all day and go through all of these things,
Yeah,
but
I feel that.
links are going to be in the show notes. But I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about what you're creating right now and how people can find it and how it's reaching people.
Yeah, so I have a blog called Quips and Confessionals, which is essays and humor from a bi evangelical pastor's daughter and survivor advocate. I write about religious trauma, family dysfunction, shame, so that you can reclaim your voice, identity, and creativity. That's the official bio line. I also add quite a bit of there's some two parts that I've had. Some of them are some spiritual reflections, but from the feminist theology lens. I love to, as part of uplifting the voices of women, I think it's so important in this world where people are trying to weaponize the Bible for the trad wife aesthetic. But trying to say, oh, the women in the Bible, they were so silent and submissive, of really highlighting the women in the Bible who were not that,
Love that.
and really break the mold. So when I do speak about spirituality, it's from a feminist lens. So that's another part of it. The other part of it is humor. So much of us have gone through evangelical culture, and it was this whole subculture, right? For so long, I thought that it was just the way in life. There had the straight and narrow path, but I just learned that it was a culture. I think part of reclaiming that culture and taking out the power that it had over my life is humor is so powerful for that. So I like to add some humor too, because I think just being able to find the funny parts in things
Yeah.
is so powerful for being able to reclaim the power that things had over us. So one of the ones that I did was a satire of the faith-based activities from my childhood Bible, where my childhood Bible has some wild faith-based activities in it. It was telling us to write letters to the newspaper to tell them not to print astrology or like,
Wow.
so I have little annotations in there. That's what I like to do. I have some upcoming ones where I'm doing satire of the True Love Waits Bible, and that sort of thing, and just different faith-based activities and things that I find that I can satirize in order to reclaim the power that
Yeah, I
those
love
things
that.
had.
That's really fun. I will definitely be checking it out. I hadn't had time to take a look at it yet, but I will definitely be. And
Yeah,
that
no
is
problem.
on Substack?
It is.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm also on, let's see, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and TikTok.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I will follow you in all those places. My threads recently got taken down. I don't know what
Oh
happened.
no.
I was growing really quickly on threads, and then all of a sudden we got the message that it had been removed because I violated
Oh.
something. And it said sometimes when you're growing really quickly, it can flag you. So we appealed it
Yeah.
and it came back for a day and then it went away again. And I was like, oh.
Oh no.
So my new threads is my name. I made a new thread with a different account, but it can't be attached to my Loom Life Instagram anymore, which is a bummer. But I will follow you with my name account now because I'm loving threads.
I love
It's great
Threads.
to really reach people and find your people in your little
Mm-hmm.
subgroups. I'm a multi-passionate, so I have a photography thread and
Mm,
a golf thread and a mental health thread. This is great. I love this.
yeah.
All the links to all of your social media and sites will be listed in the show notes. What do you want to leave listeners with? Because you've lived through a lot. You found yourself in this really creative space and advocacy space, which seems like it feels very good and comfortable for you.
Yeah.
So for people who are still stuck in a place where they know they want to leave, or maybe they're in the process of leaving a situation or removing people from their life that have been harmful, but they're still not out of it yet, what message would you give them?
I think the most helpful thing for me through that was something that my mom actually instilled in me, was to question things, was just to have that curiosity in life and
Yeah.
that curiosity for knowledge. And it's gonna feel bad at first. You're gonna feel a little bit of guilt, like you're doing something wrong. But guilt can just be things that we haven't fully processed yet. It's not necessarily good or bad. And so I think being open to that knowledge as you're getting out of it, I think doing anything you can, whether it's putting a little money away, anything that you can do in order to to get out of that
Yes.
is things that you can do. I think another thing is I think it's so easy to internalize that we're alone, especially when we're in those abusive situations. But we aren't alone. And I think that shame of being in that situation can really separate us from other people. But being brave enough to make those connections can really help us and bring us back to ourselves. I think another thing, not to go on too long, but as we get into that place of safety, we need to find that place of safety first before we can access those emotions of grief and anger.
Yeah.
And those grief and angers are going to be what deliver us to our identity and our voice. And those are all part of the process. And they're not things to be afraid of, even though they seem really scary.
Yeah.
Um, but they're going to be the ones that are going to help us find what's truly underneath all of it, and what's going to be underneath all of it is so beautiful.
Yeah.
And finally, just embracing that voice without fear. Right? Our voice, our creativity is so powerful, and creativity is such a powerful vehicle for going through all of those emotions. And really expressing it. If Reiki isn't your thing, there's some great somatic pathways. There's neurographic art, which is a great way of doing it. There's just art in general. Any creative thing can be very regulating as you're getting out of that situation, and is also just a way of expressing your voice and finding that identity in you again that you can trust. So yeah, trust your intuition. Yeah,
Yeah.
it'll lead you to freedom.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. And just keep listening to yourself and your
Yeah, your
intuition.
body is so wise, and it wants what's best for you always.
Yeah. Well, I loved this conversation. Thank you for sharing so much.
Yeah.
And your work is really healing and powerful. So thank
Oh,
you for
thank you.
coming on. This was great. If anyone wants to find more information about Kate and check out her work, you can look in the show notes on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all the places. And yeah, thank you again, Kate, for coming on. We appreciate you so
Yeah,
much.
thank you. Appreciate it.